Since the Arab conquests of the 7th century and the spread of Islam, Christians, Muslims, and Jews have been living side by side from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. More often than not, we find Christians and Jews living under Muslim rule in the conquered areas that were to become the core regions of Islam. But in the Iberian Peninsula, in Sicily, in southern Italy, or in the Crusader states, that is, in regions conquered by Christian princes after centuries of Muslim rule, we also find the opposite situation: Muslims living under Christian rule. There were Muslim communities in Sicily until the 13th century and in Spain until the 16th. In the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, on the other hand, the emperors did not accept any Muslims as their subjects. The Muslim communities of Anatolia, modern Turkey, emerged after the collapse of Byzantine power in the region at the end of the 11th century. In the Balkans, the first Muslim communities appeared in the course of the Ottoman conquests in the late 14th century. The Middle Ages was, of course, not the first time in European history that populations of different religions had lived together, or that the subjects of a prince did not share his religion. For many centuries, the Ottoman Empire ruled over a multitude of peoples with different religions. By the time Islam emerged, however, Christianity was the official religion in both the eastern and western part of the Roman Empire. The ancient polytheistic religions were banned, and Judaism was conditionally tolerated. The formerly multi-religious Roman Empire was rapidly transforming into a mono-religious political entity. Islam, following in the footsteps of Christianity, was from the start intolerant towards the polytheistic religions of Arabia and northern Africa. Pagans were not acceptable as subjects of the caliphs and had to convert. On the contrary, Christians and Jews, as well as Zoroastrians in Iran, who formed population majorities in the newly conquered territories, were granted religious freedom. The Muslim jurists of the Middle Ages elaborated a legal framework based on the concept of dhimma that allowed non-Muslims to live as protected, though second-class subjects, socially and politically subordinate to Muslims. Similar frameworks were later adopted for the Muslim subjects by Christian rulers in Italy and Spain. Eventually, Christian princes opted for religious homogenization and proceeded to enforce conversion. The Muslim counterparts did not take such steps, although we do know of Muslim rulers who adopted intolerant policies towards their non-Muslim subjects with the aim of forcing them to convert. Even if we take into consideration the occasional bursts of persecution, there is no denying that for many centuries, Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived peacefully side by side. This state of affairs, however, and the protection of religious freedom were predicated on the subordinate position of the populations who did not adhere to the dominant faith. The coexistence of different religions in the Middle Ages and the early modern times was not grounded on tolerance or respect for the beliefs of other people. It is true that Islam, the younger of the monotheistic religions of the Mediterranean, formally acknowledges that Christianity and Judaism, its predecessors, have partial access to the truth of God and tolerates them because of that, but it does not respect them. On the contrary, Muslim societies before the advent of modernity were exasperated with the obstinacy of Christians and Jews preferring to stay loyal to their ancestral worship and not accept Islam. In the case of Christianity, the theological considerations about the place of Jews in the divine plan for salvation compelled the Church to accept their presence, even though she had no respect for the Jewish faith. Christian societies may have been generally hostile towards Jews, but Christian princes, more often than not, tolerated them in their lands. Islam, on the other hand, was a newcomer that was first regarded as a heresy and later as a pagan religion created by a pseudo-prophet. On either account, it could not be accepted by the Church. No wonder that we find Muslims living under Christian rule only in reconquered regions, not in the core lands of Christian Europe, with one exception, the Muslim Tatars of Polish Lithuania, who retained religious freedom. How can we conceptualize the coexistence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the medieval and early modern era in such diverse times, places, or cultural and political environments? Each case is different, of course, and generalizations can be misleading. The generally peaceful coexistence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews in Spain, both in Muslim Andalusia and Christian Aragon, gave rise to the concept of convivencia, introduced by Americo Castro in 1948. Convivencia has been very popular in public history and has also been used by scholars to describe phenomena of religious coexistence outside the Iberian Peninsula. The notion, however, has not remained unchallenged. It has been rightly criticized as projecting an idealized picture that disregards the systemic discrimination of populations with different faith. In recent decades, scholars of medieval Spain have shown that tension, violence, conflict, and exclusion were equally part of interreligious relations. Coexistence was fraught with antagonism that bred resentment. Social tensions and religious animosity led now and again to outbursts of violence against religious others. The expulsion of Jews in 1492 inaugurated an era of religious homogenization in Spain that was completed in the first 2 decades of the 17th century with the deportation of the Moriscos, the Muslim inhabitants who had converted to Christianity. At the other end of the Mediterranean, the Muslim Ottoman Empire continued the established policy of toleration and remained a multi-religious state until its dissolution in the early 20th century. In comparison with Spain or continental Europe during the wars of religion, the early modern Ottoman Empire appeared to many as a haven of plurality, a tolerant society in which different religious communities coexisted peacefully until they fell prey to the sirens of nationalism. Recent scholarship, however, has questioned this idealized picture. Looking at the matter from a theoretical perspective, Karen Barkey has argued that given that empires are inherently diverse, they use toleration as a means of rule, of extending, consolidating, and enforcing state power. Toleration, she says, is one among many policies of incorporation, such as persecution, assimilation, conversion, or expulsion. But if the toleration of religious diversity was a way to ensure the imposition and maintenance of imperial rule, then there is no incongruence between a general policy of toleration, as practiced by the Ottomans, and sporadic events of persecution. Taken together, the sources of the Ottoman period do not give a uniform picture of interreligious relations. Alongside tolerance and cooperation, there is also hostility and distrust. And in spite of peaceful coexistence, time and again, we see formerly friendly neighbors to turn on each other violently. This is hardly surprising, of course. In the past, as now, social relations of any kind did not remain static, but were constantly negotiated and reshaped in the field of everyday life. For many Ottoman subjects, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, living together with religious others was a fact of life they would gladly dispense with if they only could. Even though Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side in peace most of the time, and probably took care to uphold a modicum of good relations by showing respect and discretion towards religious others, the balance was in many cases frail, and social tranquility could easily be disturbed. It is impossible to generalize on the ease or suffering of non-Muslim life or on the symbiotic or conflicting nature of their relations to Muslims, either in the Ottoman Empire or in medieval Muslim polities. The same is true about Muslims under Christian rule. Social relations are dynamic and are constantly negotiated and reshaped. Religious identity is only one of the factors influencing their formation. Social class and status are also crucial factors, as well as the demographic makeup of mixed towns and localities. For example, anecdotal evidence points to that the ports and commercial cities, which are the par excellence hubs of plurality and intense interreligious interaction, were also the most frequent places of episodes of intolerance and religious strife. Aphorisms of one kind or the other in respect to interreligious relations ignore the dynamic nature and present them as static and consolidated. If we succumb to them, we lose from sight what we are supposed to look for, how Muslims, Christians, and Jews experienced, interpreted, and reacted to the challenges of coexistence in early modern and in medieval and early modern polities, with a particular blend of religious toleration and institutional inequality, and how coexistence, whether symbiotic or confrontational, was constantly in the making and not merely a condition that was reproduced from one generation to another.